If deals keep slipping through the cracks, alignment could be the culprit. We're unpacking how culture and collaboration can turn alignment into real revenue growth on today's episode of Closing Time. Thanks for tuning into Closing Time, the show for go-to-market leaders. I'm Val Riley, head of marketing for Unbounce, Insightly, and LeadsRx. We are welcoming back Jeff Davis to the show. He is the author of Create Togetherness. Jeff, thanks for coming back.
Val, thank you for having me back. I appreciate it. Looking forward to the conversation.
So we were talking about your big ideas for collaboration, and we got down so many rabbit holes, which were wonderful, that we only covered 3 of the 5. So I asked you to come back so we can dig into the rest. How does that sound?
It sounds awesome.
All right. So last time we talked about alignment as an operating system, business design flaws, and the real tax of being misaligned. So the final 2 big ideas are going to be covered today. And just for anyone who's tuning in fresh, what's changed in the way leaders are talking about alignment lately?
Yeah, I reflected on this one, and I would say, I've been doing this work for quite some time, focused on looking at sales and marketing alignment. And so for me, when I look at personal experiences, the conversations and interviews I've had with senior revenue leaders, as well as just, research staying up to date, there are many things that have changed, many for the better. And I would say 2 that probably are at the top of my list, or that kind of rise to the top, are alignment really has become a strategic necessity. And I think leaders are finally recognizing that. I would say, beginning my work, which is probably nearly 7 to 10 years now, sales and marketing alignment was not really talked about, to be honest with you. And I started, blogging and that sort of thing, and there wasn't a lot of receptivity. I think that a lot of leaders looked at it as a nice to have. I think we have finally shifted over into the thought process that leaders recognize that it is a strategic necessity. It is no longer a nice to have. And in order for you really to do business with the modern buyer, you have to focus on alignment. I think a couple of things that have, I would say, forced the hand is, we have a very digital first buyer. Back in the day, and you're aware of this, you didn't have access to all of these channels. You didn't have immediate access to your peers to get their point of view. And so a lot of companies have recognized is that we have to be in all the places that our customers are. And the only way you can do that is to truly have an aligned effort across sales and marketing. In addition to that, I think you have seen the buying committee, in some cases, double in size over the last years. And so, again, not only are you talking to one key stakeholder or few key stakeholders, you're having to manage a group, sometimes 10 to 15 people, having singular conversations that are aligned and are moving the account toward purchase. So I think all those things have raised the stakes for revenue leaders to recognize that alignment is a necessity and no longer a nice to have. And then the second one I think that we'll get to during our conversation is RevOps really emerging as a function that kind of operationalizes, what I like to say, operationalizes alignment. It really removes the silos and creates this ownership that is really necessary in order to actually make alignment happen. So I would say for me, as I think through how the focus on sales marketing alignment has shifted and how leaders are recognizing things differently, I think those 2 things around alignment being a necessity or a strategic lever that we can use in order to be more competitive in the marketplace. And then secondly, RevOps really emerging as this new way, a new approach to really operationalize alignment.
Yeah, let's pick right up there, because when I was looking at the 5 big ideas, this one definitely stood out to me. And it really is about that one source of truth for the organization and RevOps owning that source of truth. So first of all, as a CRM company, you are speaking our language there. But specifically, why is RevOps the owner? Because I think that is so crucial to harmony within sales and marketing, is when RevOps really owns those data points.
Yeah, when I look at my approach to sales and marketing alignment, at the end of the day, I'm a strategist, and I'm always looking at how do we strategically align these 2 functions. But as of recently, I have changed I think the way that I think about sales and marketing alignment over the last several years, I would say, many years ago, I really was convinced that if we aligned strategy and sales and marketing understood that they had one strategic vision, that we really could work together in a different way. And it's not that I don't think that's true, but I think that statement or that line I thought was incomplete. As I have really been thinking about it in a modern way, and a lot of this has changed because technology has changed and evolved. We know that marketing tech exploded many years ago. Sales tech came right after. And so we now have the tools in order to look at things differently. And so RevOps offers an opportunity to, in my opinion, really operationalize alignment. Before, I think we had the strategy. In some organizations, they had an aligned culture. We had all the components, but at the end of the day, we still were relying on sales ops and marketing ops and somebody to connect the dots. And the more people you have in the room and the more people you have in the conversation, you're still playing telephone. And so now that we have the technological maturity, a lot of organizations are really, leveling up their digital maturity. RevOps provides that platform for us really to truly have a single source of truth because there is one owner, right? And prior to, RevOps really coming in the scene, we had very disconnected systems. We had disconnected platforms. The tech stack was bloated. You had, people were buying things in silos. And so there was no real way to truly work together. And let's be honest, at the end of the day, a lot of stacks were just wasting money because things were underutilized. The data was a mess. And so I am really excited about what RevOps provides an organization and what its function is. And so I think that's why you're seeing a fairly quick uptake of that approach by most organizations, especially on the enterprise level. And even really so, I think we're at about 52% or so in the mid-market space of them also adopting the RevOps approach.
Yeah, I will say it resonates so well with me because I can remember a time before there was RevOps, and it almost felt like there was this moment where, hey, these leads or this effort or this initiative left marketing and went to sales, and there was always that bit of a gap. And I really do feel like RevOps fills that gap and just makes the organization and both sales and marketing so much more successful.
And I agree with you. I remember times when I was a seller where, I was, in my car in the territory trying to figure out why my sales data did not align up with my marketing insights and then trying to directionally go which one's true. And you never were able to get a real clarity on what those what was really going on. And so you're always, even though we had a wealth of data, we were kind of guessing because one report would say one thing and then the other report would say something else. And then it's just it was very frustrating. So I think where this really helps everybody is there is one source of truth. There's one report, there's one number, and then we're all, reacting to and able to support the business based on the same song sheet, so to say, or information. So to me, it's a game changer.
Yeah, agree. Okay, we're going to get to the fifth big idea, and I just think this one is huge. You call it culture as the foundation for a sustainable alignment. So why does culture matter so much when it comes to keeping the sales and marketing teams in alignment?
I started to ask myself a different question. I always asked myself, I was focused on, again, because I'm a strategist, align strategy and everybody's on the same song sheet and we're all moving in the right direction. But I kind of within recent years, turned that question upside down to say, what prevents organizations from either A, not getting aligned or B, not able to sustain alignment? Because we see in many cases, organizations will have an alignment effort. It'll last for a couple quarters and then it goes back to what it was before, right? Human behavior. And I think what I found time and time again, as I really started to think about this and dig into the data and have conversations, is the one component that was not fully addressed in those organizations that couldn't maintain it or achieve it was they didn't have the right culture in order to build alignment on. And what I mean by that is, and I don't mean because this is stereotypically where you go, right? Leaders are I don't have time to create this culture. And they're thinking workshops and offsites and rah, 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 and signs in the hallway. That is not what I mean. I mean, truly looking at, organizational psychology to create culture that creates an environment where people can behave in a way that is aligned with what you're trying to achieve. And so you look at research from like Amy Edmondson out of Harvard. She talks about psychological safety. And it is important because not just because it's the right thing to do, is that you do not get the outputs and have the real conversations you need to have if people don't feel safe and or feel like it's not going to make a difference. And so you can do all these things. You can have RevOps, you can, have an aligned strategy, you can have all the reporting lines. But if people don't fundamentally trust each other, they don't want to work together, they don't have a way to work together, then it doesn't work. And so I really challenge myself and I challenge, revenue leaders to say, you have to start with the culture in order for everything to build on top of it and actually function. Because if we do all this work, it may work for a while, but if we're talking about sustainable transformation and more predictable outcomes, it has to be built on a strong foundation where we fundamentally see ourselves as one unified team. We have interconnected outcomes, and we truly see ourselves as a revenue engine versus functions that happen to just work side by side to kind of achieve a similar goal. And so that's why I have, in the recent years felt that culture really is the primary foundation of if you're really going to talk about transforming sales and marketing into an aligned revenue engine, it has to start with culture.
Yeah, there is a tendency in sales and marketing to have that us them mentality where, oh, if the leads were better, we would be doing more. Or if they were working the leads harder, we would be doing better. So really in sales and marketing, it's so easy to fall into that pit. So what are some signs of a healthy versus unhealthy sales marketing culture? And I'd like to follow up on that by asking about the role that leadership plays there.
Yeah. So one thing I'll share a little bit of a story with you and then get into kind of what I see as those primary indicators of a healthy or unhealthy. So I made the transition from sales and marketing quite early in my career. And I naively always thought that like marketing was in the ivory tower and they were justifying their high salaries because, we got paid, six figures to do print brochures and update the website, not fully understanding what it took to be a marketer. And I know a lot of people, especially if you're in field sales, sometimes even sales leadership, feel the same way. I think for a lot of organizations that has changed. I hope most. But I say all that to say, when I actually transition into brand marketing, one of the things I noticed, and one of the things that was the most challenging for me, is that the culture is different. And it's different by virtue of the role and the function that marketing is serving. The time horizon is longer. You have to work through people. So you're doing much more, leading without authority. You have to get stakeholder alignment across different functions. That's not stereotypically something that a salesperson is doing. So they're rewarded for taking quick action, being bold and aggressive. There is just something different fundamentally I need to do. And so so you have to resolve that because by virtue, like, this is what we do. And so that was my aha moment to say, oh, like marketing culture is different by virtue of the work that they're doing. So as a leader, I have got to find a way to bring us together so that while in our individual functions, we're going to operate how we operate. But the higher level culture is that we are all focused on the same outcomes in a way that is complementary to each other. And so when I look at kind of unhealthy signs, and you'll stereotypically see this across all organizations that are the misaligned. There is, well, let me start with the healthy first, and then we'll go to the negative. You'll see shared goals and a planning rhythm. So goals are, top down, stereotypically starting with revenue, and there is some sort of planning rhythm or cadence that we do together. A hallmark sign that there's going to be tension between sales and marketing is that there is no co-creation for the planning cycle. If you're not in the same room planning, I automatically know it's going to be tension and there's an issue. I would also say, back to what we talked about, the top of the conversation, there's a psychological safety between sales and marketing, especially leadership. If sales and marketing leadership can have honest conversation with each other without being combative or going into turf wars, that's your typical indicator that the rest of the organization is pretty healthy. And you see that many times where sales and marketing leaders, they get along really well. And it is seen, they recognize what the other one brings to them as a benefit versus only focused on what they are being held accountable for. And so that to me is, when I see that, it's an automatic trigger that that's a healthy relationship. And then I'd say last but not least, learning from each other. So Deb Meshik, she's a PhD who focuses on close relationships and collaboration. I've referenced her work a number of times within my book and my work and articles and whatnot. And one of the things that she talks about that really stood out to me, there are different levels of collaboration, which she goes into in her work, and I won't dive into that too deeply. But one of the things she says, when you get to a true collaborative relationship, is there's a mutual learning from each other and a mutual benefit from each other. And it resonates with me because I think of things like marketing providing insights to sales to be able to have tailored, personalized conversations with a prospect, right? That is something that we're able to offer you to help you, but then also having a feedback loop to hear directly from sales, frontline sales, not just sales leadership, because by the time it gets up, sometimes it's a little scrubbed. I didn't say that out loud, but we know how that works. But having some sort of mechanism, whether it be a sales council or whatever that is, to hear directly from sales to get the boots on the ground POV, and then be able to, tell them back, hey, we heard you, and this is how we implemented that to close that loop. I think that's also another one. If you're able to have that sort of conversation and relationship, it's a healthy sign. And then I'd say, the reverse of that on the unhealthy, competing success metrics. So if I do what I'm supposed to do and you do what you're supposed to do, they don't necessarily correlate and get us to where we need to be. Multiple versions of the truth related to our RevOps conversation. The data is just not aligned. Our reports are saying different things. And so we're arguing that we're doing the right thing and that we've done what we're supposed to do, which is the truth, but we have different versions of the truth. And then last but not least, the stereotypical, turf wars where sales are, calling out marketing because the leads are terrible and vice versa. So those are sort of the kind of high level things that I see when you look at a healthy relationship between sales and marketing, and then a less healthy relationship between sales and marketing.
Yeah, I mean, just everything you're saying is resonating just in my daily practice. I had a relationship with the head of sales once that was very special because we were both hired at the same time. We were both interviewing at the same time, and we were able to meet each other before either of us took the role. Oh. And I remember walking in the room and thinking, and I said to him, I'm really interested in this job and it's a pleasure to meet you. But if we don't hit it off, I'm walking. This relationship has got to be spot on. And in order for me to really be interested in taking this job. And he echoed the same sentiment, and we ended up both taking the roles. And really it was the foundation for an excellent relationship, because even if we disagreed, we kept it behind closed doors and worked through. And then when we came in front of the teams jointly, we always presented a unified front. And it really made for a very healthy culture. Of course, a company that was very successful and ended up being acquired, which, was the winning deal. But it really does start at the top with a healthy relationship at the leadership level.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And it was actually really, really insightful and very smart of you to be like, let's have this conversation now, because you're right. That energy between sales and marketing leadership dictates everything else. Like the whole marketing team will disregard sales and vice versa. I've seen organizations where, they're very sales focused. Sales leadership gets priority from the executive team. Marketing is either seen as sales support or just there. And that permeates the organization. And it's the way that sales engages with marketing. It's the way the sales leader engages with marketing. So it is truly, that is, and I think leadership always has to set the tone, but I think that relationship especially is very visible if it's not a healthy one.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I also thought something you said was super interesting about how different the roles on the marketing team are versus the roles on a sales team. Because sales people are often, they can be that lone wolf. They can dictate their own schedule. They can run their own show and still be very successful and still be a healthy contributing member of the sales team. Yeah. Really, in marketing, you can't do that. I always use the analogy that I got from a former CMO of mine of marketing's like a soccer team, right? Like We have to
Yes.
pass everything back and forth. We have a very wide playing surface, so to speak, with the many, many channels we operate in. And we need each other in order to be successful. Like the writers need designers, and the designers need the paid media team, and everybody needs the digital team. And we all need the web team to be looking for growth opportunities. So like we all are so interconnected. And so when you think what you observed was very keen in that the cultures within those teams can be very different.
Yeah. And to be honest with you, when I made the transition from sales to marketing, it wasn't so much quote unquote the work that I struggled with, like transparently amongst friends, it was the culture because I was rewarded for, to your point, all of those lone wolf behaviors because I had a territory, I had to drive business. And no one gives you a manual that says, now that you're in marketing, you need to be more collaborative. Come in and don't talk up in meetings unless you understand the dynamics of who's who and you understand your cross-functional partners, and go to the mid-reg early so that you can get a concept review before you push things through. This is very healthcare specific because everything is highly regulated. No one gives you that in your onboarding manual, so to say. And so a lot of that I had to learn by trial and error. But it is, and I've talked to many salespeople that have transitioned to marketing, it is somewhat jarring how different it is, right? And if you have good mentors and you have good leadership, they can help you get through that. But it is very different, and rightfully so. I'm not making a judgment there per se. But if you have not made that transition, I don't think you fully understand and can fully internalize how different the cultures are.
Jeff, I feel like we could talk for hours. So those were the final two big ideas. Is there anything you want to say to kind of wrap up the five big ideas? Because I really, like I said, I've learned a lot from talking to you.
Thank you. I would say, well, first of all, thank you for the opportunity to kind of share some of the things I've been musing on and thinking about and, nerding out on, which is what I do when it comes to sales marketing alignment. Don't judge me on that. But I would say at the end of the day, I think these five big ideas are really kind of leading how I'm thinking about taking a more thoughtful approach to operationalizing alignment. It is not easy. It is going to get more difficult as things get more complex. But I do feel like we have the technology to support what we're trying to do. I think the biggest thing I would want listeners to remember is I am convinced that culture has to be the foundation for any sort of transformation that we do. I think secondarily, in order to operationalize alignment, it has to be done by RevOps. I think a lot of organizations that will be laggards in transforming to this approach will continue to find it difficult and more difficult. And so at the end of the day, we can be aligned in everything else, but if we can't actually operationalize it, it's not going to stick. And that impacts everything from being able to, sustainably grow, being able to have more accurate forecasting, et cetera, et cetera. And so I would say those are probably the biggest, things I would want anybody, if they didn't listen to anything else we said or anything else we talked about, and hopefully that's not the case, that they walk away with that and really think about taking on alignment transformation effort to make sure that these things are at the cornerstone of the work that they do. And I get excited about this stuff. So there's so much opportunity here. And I hope those that listen to the podcast will also feel that way after they get done listening to us.
Well, I know I'm energized. Jeff, as a reminder, where can folks find your book, Create Togetherness?
Yeah, so we're on all platforms. Amazon is probably the easiest. You can go and search Create Togetherness and it'll pop up. You can also follow me on LinkedIn. My handle is @MeetJeffDavis. Everything is also linked there too. So hopefully feel free to go out and get my first book. And obviously some of the things that we talked about today, my thinking has evolved, but I think that's a great place to start with just my point of view of how we should approach aligning sales and marketing. And obviously we know why. Many benefits, but we don't have time for that today.
So many. Jeff, thank you so much for joining us for not just one, but two episodes of Closing Time.
Dal, thank you for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity.
All right. And remember, you can get this episode delivered right to your inbox. Just click the link in the show notes. We will see you next week.